It's all about the history, and my engagement with revitalizing Mardi Gras history of the island was tantamount to what it was all about. It was the cornerstone, it was the foundation to bring back a 100-and-something-year-old festival in a grand way. And during the research, I came across a stereopticon photograph that was taken of the Strand in the 1850s. And Casey Green did some research for me, who was the curator, and said this was an actual series of temporary arches that were constructed so Galveston could celebrate Sangerfest. So Galveston went all out. We had the electric light pavilion on the seawall, and temporary arches were constructed and festooned throughout the Strand area. And this little stereopticon photograph just sparked my imagination. So I thought, what if we were to do temporary civic arches spanning the streets of the historic district in Galveston? But we can't recreate that history. We can build on it. Let's approach the most impressive, most prominent and respected architects in America and see if we might be able to kindle their interest and attract them to come to Galveston and to create an arch. I know that sounds ambitious, but I was in my early 30s and I had a lot of ambition, and I thought, why not? It's worth a try. And so I did some research, and already, of course, being a student and loving architecture, I already had on my hot list a number of great architects. I started with one that was close to home because the Mitchells were working with Ford, Powell, and Carson on the Tremont House. So I approached Boone Powell, who thought it was a brilliant idea and was completely behind it. And then I went to a local Galvestonian who had really made his mark throughout the country, particularly in Houston, and his name was Eugene Aubrey. He was a native BOI, went to Ball High School, and Eugene was a huge supporter of this project and of course designed an arch. He is most notable for designing the Wortham Theater in Houston. And Gene was really very instrumental. He suggested that we contact Charles Moore, who at the time was the Dean of Architecture at the University of Texas. So he was able to secure him with this concept. I knew a developer and had worked on a project in Houston called Four Leaf Towers. Giorgio Borlinghi was the developer, and he had used Cesar Pelli, who was Dean of Yale School of Architecture. So he gave me an entree to him. I contacted the Dean, Cesar Pelli, and he immediately, once he saw the concept, and I kept sending that little stereopticon photograph around, he said, I'm all in. I then went in person to meet with Michael Graves in Princeton. He was Dean of Princeton School of Architecture, and he said, if you can get Helmut Jahn to do it in Chicago, I will do it. I quickly did some fun research to find out they were highly competitive, almost in a combative way. So I went to Chicago and met with Helmut Jahn. He said, is Graves in? I said, Graves is in. He said, if he's in, I'm in. And then he said, I'll get you Stanley Tigerman, who was also a very prominent architect in Chicago. So here we were. We had 7 great American architects willing to design for free. But I had to promise and guarantee them that it would be not only well publicized, but they would be built. Now that was a tall order. So I went to several folks in Galveston. George Mitchell built 3 of them, including the one in front of his, with his team. And then the late J.R. McConnell had a construction company, and he actually built 4 of them. So between the two, a wonderful philanthropy of the Mitchells and J.R. with their construction firms, we were able to recreate their design. They came for the opening, and there was a double-decker bus, and we took all the architects around to tour their arches, and they were all completed except Jan's. So it went across 4 corners. It was quite ambitious design. It wasn't complete by the due date. Here's a sketch of it, the model of it. And so Tigerman, being competitive, said, this isn't surprising. None of his buildings ever finish on time either. And then Jan turned to Tigerman. He says, I wish you'd just stand up when you speak. A lot of competitive banter among those architects. They were the best in class. It was quite exciting. A number of them I kept in close contact with for many years. Michael Graves has passed on. Helmut John was killed in a bicycling accident just 2 years ago. And so we've lost to Charles Moore, passed on. A number of them are no longer here. But their designs and their work and the impact it had in Galveston and the excitement it generated around the country. From the New York Times, who did an entire full-page story, to Time magazine, it really was a very special moment. But it didn't end there. What makes it most exciting to me, that the Arches had a life beyond Galveston. So thanks to the gentleman at the time who was the head of the Galveston Art Center, Bill Robinson, he had a friend at the Cooper Hewitt Museum in New York. And I went to him and I said, how could we get the Cooper Hewitt, which is part of the Smithsonian, to possibly show some of the designs and the models in New York? He said, let's make an appointment with Lisa Taylor. And so he did, and Bill and I went and met with Lisa, and I had all of his documentation. I had the designs, the drawings. We brought photographs of the maquettes, as well as photographs of how they looked in the city streets. And she immediately, on site, said, yes, we will do an exhibit here at the Cooper Hewitt on Arches for Galveston. And we stood in the front of the Cooper Hewitt Museum with the sign out front, Arches for Galveston, and it was really a special moment. But we didn't want to give up. So there was a lot of interest in why can't we add one more? And so we did. We approached, I met with Aldo Rossi and his representatives. He spoke no English. I spoke only a little Italian. And we met in New York with his representatives. And I showed him again the sketches, the designs, and he kept saying, CCC. And he was in. And what was particularly exciting about Aldo Rossi was that he loved designing with port elements. And today's Galveston folks would have been so impressed with his design. And his goal was to make his arch be beacons like you would see at a port. And the beacons, or buoys as he described them, would also be a concentration for people to come in. One of the ideas too about the arches was not just to observe them walking down a sidewalk. We wanted people to experience the arches walking through the arch. So Aldo Rossi came in person. In fact, he got in the spirit so much he wore a lighthouse on his head during the celebration. And it was just that way about Mardi Gras. And I've realized when you capture the imagination of people, doors just open, whether they're developers, philanthropists, business folks, European heads of consul generals, South American representatives. When you're dealing with State Departments, if you can capture their imagination and guarantee them that you're going to deliver it in spades, and it's going to be guided with good principles, it's going to be solid, it's going to be based on historical reference, you have a really good chance of pulling it off. And we did that with the Arches for Galveston.
You want to make the most of life, so we help you make the most of your money with access to 55,000 fee-free ATMs and advanced pay up to 2 days early. Become a member and open a UFCU account today.